algorithm YouTube channel.
That's right. Specifically, Redefined Imaginary, Session 2. But we're also pulling in some really practical stuff from Session 4.
Exactly. So our mission today is to unpack what this whole Redefine Imaginify idea actually says about, what sparks creativity. And crucially, how you can actively build up those creative muscles. We're talking about becoming your own internal architect, as the sources put it.
Yeah, and what's great about this material is it's not just a list of inspirational things. It gives you a framework and then, importantly, those actionable strategies on how to actually use these ideas.
Right.
It really pushes back against that idea of just waiting for inspiration to hit. Instead, it frames creativity as this active process, synthesis, really, and it needs fuel-rich, varied, intentionally chosen inputs.
So less waiting for lightning, more building the lightning rod yourself. I like that. Okay, so where does Redefine Imaginify start us off? Environment seems key, but specific kinds of environments.
Absolutely. It's not just about, having a nice view. The framework points to environments that deliberately disrupt your routine.
Disrupt.
Yeah, or ones that offer sort of new sensory input. It's about shaking things up mentally, gently, but purposefully. And one really interesting concept they bring up is liminal spaces.
Liminal spaces.
Wow.
Okay, sounds a bit academic, but the examples are really everyday, right? Like waiting rooms, airports, train stations.
Exactly those. These kind of in-between places.
So why are they so powerful? They seem kind of mundane.
Well, it's less about the place itself and more about what happens to your brain in that place. You don't have your usual routines there, right?
True. You're just waiting.
Right. You're removed from the normal demands of home or work. Your brain is kind of off script.
Yeah.
And that lack of defined purpose, that disruption, it actually frees up your mind.
Ah, I see. So because you're not on autopilot, your brain can make connections it wouldn't normally make.
Precisely. It can wander, engage with the present differently. It's not about being productive in the usual sense, so there's space for, imagination.
That's a really different way to think about those spaces. So it's about seeking out places that break the pattern, not just pretty places. And how does the internal architect, how do we put that into action?
Well, this is where Session 4 gets practical. The internal architect doesn't just stumble into these spaces. They mindfully utilize them.
You mean?
Meaning, okay, you're in that airport lounge. Instead of just killing time scrolling, maybe you use that specific mental state, that off-script feeling, for some focused brainstorming or idea generation.
Ah, okay. So it's a deliberate environmental choice to support a specific internal process.
Exactly. It's active utilization.
Got it. Okay, so that's the disruption side. What about nature? That's like the classic go-to for inspiration. How does Redefined Imaginify handle that?
It definitely includes nature, but again, through a specific lens. The term used is effortless attention.
Effortless attention, like watching clouds
Yeah.
or waves.
Yes, exactly that kind of thing.
Yeah.
You're paying attention, your mind is engaged, but it doesn't feel like hard work. It's not focused concentration.
It's more relaxed, almost meditative.
You could say that. And the key benefit, according to the source, is that this state reduces mental fatigue. It literally opens up cognitive space for imaginative thinking.
So it's creating mental breathing room, basically.
Pretty much. You're not forcing ideas, you're allowing the space for them to surface. And again, the internal architect is proactive here.
Oh, so?
They actually schedule time in nature. It's not just a nice if it happens thing. It's a deliberate practice to cultivate that state of effortless attention.
Okay, so we've got these two environmental strategies. Deliberately seeking disruption in liminal spaces and deliberately seeking relaxed openness in nature. Both are active choices.
That's the core idea for the environmental triggers, yes. A nuanced approach.
Right. Now let's shift from where we are to what we take in. The framework talks a lot about input from other creative works, books, movies, art, that kind of thing. But you mentioned it's not passive.
Definitely not. This is a really crucial part. They call it narrative cross-pollination, and it's tied to this idea that consuming creative stuff isn't just downtime.
Okay.
The source explicitly says it can be active creative work, and the internal architect adopts what Session 4 calls a strategic input diet.
A strategic input diet. Okay, I'm intrigued. What does that mean in practice? How do we do that?
It means you consciously shift how you engage with media. You move beyond just, typical entertainment consumption.
So instead of just watching a movie.
You watch it with a more critical, analytical eye. You actively ask yourself questions. What's the core story here? What visual techniques are they using? How are they creating this feeling? What's the deeper message?
Oh, so you're treating it like raw material.
Exactly. Raw material to be dissected, analyzed, understood, not just passively absorbed.
That makes sense. It's more like studying than just relaxing. And what about the cross-pollination part? The sources mention actively looking for stories and visual styles from really different areas.
Right. This isn't just about appreciating diverse things. It's about making your brain work differently, forcing it to grapple with unfamiliar forms and ideas.
What's the actionable strategy here?
Session 4 suggests creating deliberate contrast pairings.
Contrast pairings.
Yeah. So, for example, you finish reading, say, a really dense historical nonfiction book,
Yeah.
and then you immediately dive into a graphic novel from a totally different culture or genre. Or maybe listen to a complex classical piece, then switch to some really out there experimental electronic music.
Wow. Okay, so you're deliberately creating a kind of mental whiplash.
Kind of. The idea is that forcing your brain to switch between these very different modes, these different aesthetic languages, creates new connections.
The source used that example, didn't it?
Yeah.
Then sci-fi, then Renaissance art.
That's the kind of contrast they mean. It's about generating insights you just wouldn't get if you stayed comfortably within one genre or style.
Because it's the clash, the collision of different creative ideas that's actually productive. That's a direct quote, isn't it?
It is. And that leads right into the next practical technique, embracing productive friction.
Productive friction. Okay, tell me about that. Is that just another way of saying contrast?
It's more active than just experiencing contrast. It's about taking elements from those contrasting inputs and deliberately smashing them together to see what happens. It uses the inputs as raw material for something new.
Right. Okay, how do we do that? What's the exercise?
They call it the juxtaposition exercise. You take two things, concepts, images, bits of dialogue, character types, whatever, from your varied inputs that seem totally unrelated.
Yeah, okay, got two unrelated things.
And then you actively try to combine them. Ask yourself, what new idea, what story, what image emerges from forcing these two things together? What happens at their point of friction?
So it could be like mind mapping the collision or free associating.
Or even, trying a small creative exercise, like writing a paragraph that puts a character from that historical novel into the setting of that graphic novel. It's about actively leveraging the clash.
That's really powerful. It reframes creativity so much. It's not this magical thing that pops out of nowhere. It's much more like engineering almost.
Yeah.
A process of synthesis, of transformation, like you said.
Yeah.
But it needs the right stuff to work with.
Exactly. It needs that rich, varied, intentionally curated fuel.
It really makes you think differently about, scrolling through social media versus deliberately reading a challenging book or seeking out unfamiliar art. One feels passive. The other, based on this framework, feels like active work, like you're actually building something in your mind, cultivating your internal architect.
That's precisely the shift in perspective Redefined Imaginify seems to be advocating for, especially with those practical strategies from Session 4.
So it paints this picture of us needing to be really conscious curators, not just of what we read or watch, but also where we are when we're thinking. That metaphor from the source is strong. Be a curator almost for your own brain.
It is. And remember the second part they add. And also being mindful of where you are and what state of mind those places encourage. It connects everything back together.
Right, the environment and the input.
That combination, the deliberately chosen environment, whether it's liminal or natural, supporting a specific mental state, combined with the strategically curated, sometimes clashing inputs that seems to be where Redefine Imaginify suggests the real creative spark happens. It's about being proactive.
So if we pull all this together from our deep dives, Redefine Imaginify, especially drawing on sessions 2 and 4, gives us this really actionable blueprint. Inspiration isn't just luck.
Right.
It's sparked by specific environments using those disruptive liminal spaces intentionally, or scheduling time in nature for that effortless attention.
Deliberate use.
And then there's the input side. Being that internal architect with a strategic input diet, actively seeking narrative cross-pollination, creating those contrast pairings, and even forcing productive friction with juxtaposition exercises, treating creative works as raw material.
Exactly. It's a very specific, structured approach to fueling imagination and taking control of your own creative process. It's quite empowering when you think about it.
Yes. Which I guess leads to a final thought for everyone listening, a question to sort of chew on maybe.
Okay.
If creativity, according to this framework, is so heavily influenced by getting these external factors right. Finding the right disruptive places, seeking effortless attention, deliberately mixing these specific kinds of inputs. Does that mean creativity is mostly about just, finding the right triggers out there? Is it mainly an external manipulation game?
That's a great question. Or is the real heavy lifting actually internal? Is it more about building up our own individual capacity, our own internal architecture to actively find and then crucially synthesize all those external inputs within ourselves?
Right. Are we just stimulus response machines waiting for the right trigger? Or are we the ones doing the transforming?
Where does that balance lie between setting the stage and actually performing the act of creation? Something to think about.
Definitely something to think about.
Yeah.
Will you look at your commute, your Netflix, that walk in the park differently now? That's all for this deep dive. We hope it sparked some ideas for you.